All right, so in this video and the video that follows, we're going to talk about social issues of industrialization from Europe's periphery. So we're kind of thinking about the edges of Europe. So while Western Europe industrialized, the areas on the edges, so the far eastern and the far western edges lagged behind. So that's what we're going to look at in these two videos. So we're going to look at the far eastern part, which was Russia, and the far western edge, which in this case is Ireland. So in this video, we're going to look at the Irish Potato Famine. So that's what we're going to look at here. In the next video, we will look at the disastrous abolition of serfdom in Russia. So the Irish Potato Famine is the result of, or it's a result of British industrialization efforts. So if we want to understand what was going on in Great Britain, it helps to look at Great Britain, but we can't also ignore what was happening in Ireland, because what was happening in Ireland was fueling British industrialization. So let's go back a little bit and examine the relationship between Great Britain and Ireland and see how that impacted British industrialization, because British industrialization would not have succeeded without the supplies the Irish provided them. So let's take a step back and look at the relationship between the English and the Irish. So, to say the least, the relationship between the English and the Irish has not been good. And it will continue to not be good into time period 4 and almost into the present day. So going back to guys like Oliver Cromwell, and this is where the modern story kind of starts. Oliver Cromwell invaded Ireland during the last parts of the English Civil War. And if you remember back to that, Cromwell used Irish land to pay his soldiers. So he confiscated Irish land, and he used that land to pay his soldiers in the New Model Army. As a result of this, a lot of Irish landlords were absentee. They lived in England and used Irish landlord or Irish managers to collect rent. And these managers were considered traitors to the Irish. Additionally, while most of Great Britain, which included England, Scotland, and Wales, were Protestant, the Irish remained Catholic. And laws were passed preventing Catholics from participating in public life. They couldn't vote, they couldn't hold public office. And so Catholics were largely voiceless in British society. So if we fast forward to the start of the Industrial Revolution, commercialized farming was a disaster for Ireland. So we think about commercialized agriculture as making agriculture more efficient and producing more food, which was true. But if we think about what was going on in Ireland, the Irish farmers were mostly tenant farmers. They didn't own the land, they paid rent to landlords. And so when we're talking about commercialized farming in Ireland, this caused the rents to continuously go up in order to keep up with the prices of commercial farms. So the landlords had to keep raising the rents to make these little farms work because all of the other commercial farms were driving the prices of their food down. And so the rents on the commercial on these big commercial on the commercial farms in Ireland had to keep going up in order to keep up with the food prices. So the farmers, the Irish farmers, had two options. They could either keep paying the higher rents or leave and move to the cities. Neither one of those was a good option, but those were their options. And the ones that left and moved to the cities became part of the industrialized machine. But those who stayed behind and tried to keep farming, they're the ones that are going to get wrapped up in the potato famine. To pay the higher rents, the Irish had to pay or had to grow and produce more food to export to British markets. So there really wasn't a lot of room for the Irish to grow their own food to eat. So on their small personal plots, they were kind of forced by necessity to grow only potatoes. And the reason this was a necessity is because potatoes are calorie dense. So pound for pound, potatoes have a lot of calories in them. You can grow a lot in a small space, and they're like not that bad nutritionally. So you could survive on a diet of potatoes and you'd be okay. They're also pretty filling. So, an average Irish person might be eating 5 to 10 pounds of potatoes a day and not much else. And the really sad irony of the potato famine is this. During the height of the famine, the Irish were a net exporter of food. They were producing more than enough food for themselves to eat. But they had to export it all. They had to sell all the food. And we're talking good food. Meat, milk, butter, fruits and vegetables. They had to sell all of that food to make rent to stay on their farm. And that's the really dark irony of the potato famine. So let's talk about what actually happened. So in the 1840s, a disease called a potato blight struck northern Europe. And it wasn't just Ireland. But all over northern Europe. So Great Britain, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, northern France, northern Germany, all of this area was struck by this potato blight, but only Ireland was hit like this because of their potato monoculture. They only grew potatoes for their own consumption, out of necessity. Other places lost their potato crop, but had other food to eat. And that's the danger of a monoculture. If you only grow one thing, you are susceptible to agricultural diseases or economic downturns, which could change your whole economic outlook. Now, the response here from the British was virtually non existent. The initial response was to do nothing. This was an Irish problem, and the Irish should fix it. But eventually, they did offer aid. But it was I guess backhanded or sinister. So here are some of the things that the British did. They offered aid, but no one who owned land could get it. So if you wanted to get help, you had to sell your land. They also imported a bunch of American corn but the Irish couldn't process it because none of their mills were working. Because of the famine. So it didn't really help. And to make matters worse, those who ate it got sick because it wasn't processed properly. They also tried to give money to build public works and infrastructure. But the money was pocketed by corrupt Irish officials. Now, the only thing that might have actually worked was repealing the Corn Laws. But the landowners in Parliament voted that down. And eventually, the famine itself was an impetus to finally repeal the Corn Laws in 1846. So, what were the results of this? What were the big consequences of this? So, in the end, the population of Ireland decreased by about 3 million people. So 1 million died. One million went to Great Britain, and another million went to the United States. And the population of Ireland really hasn't recovered from that. I think maybe just recently they've just now hit the population of the pre-famine Irish population. As a result of this, industrialization in the US and in Great Britain increased tremendously. The influx of 1 million new workers, millions of desperate workers willing to work for little money increased efficiency and productivity. We can also think about this, and many Irish do. The Irish consider this an example of ethnic cleansing. That British inaction killed 1 million Irish. And we can maybe think about this in terms of maybe the last gasp of religious conflict that the Protestant British were trying to finally exterminate the Catholic Irish. It's debatable, but it's definitely a valid point of view, especially from the Irish. So while the picture in Great Britain and in the United States is that industrialization was hard, but people worked through it and got richer and quality of life went up. The other side of that is that the Irish and people on the periphery of Europe had to suffer in order for the British and the Americans to industrialize. So the British industrialization effort would not have worked had it not been for the Irish shipping them all the food they needed to eat while they were working and not farming. So I'm going to stop there. We're going to make another video about what's going on in Russia. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.